Warning: the following video presentation contains scenes of extreme deliciousness. Failure to either eat first or bring a snack to consume during the presentation could result in wanting to lick the screen or in some way act the fool. Ain't nobody want that. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, boys and ghouls. DK's making a snack today. What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be? DK's making a snack today. Shove it right into your mouth. DK's making a snack today. What's it gonna be? Is he making it for me? DK's making a snack today. It's time for tactical snacking with DK.
Hey. What's going on, folks? It is late, thus, Tacky Snacks After Dark. Hey, what's going on, the person? Apron is off. I'm in my slippies, I'm in my shorts, and I am doing some prep work for tomorrow. Because tomorrow's stream, we're going to be making some ribs. And so I've got a few things that I need to get done for that tonight, so I figured, you know what, I'm doing it anyways, and so I'm just streaming it. So hopefully everyone's having a good night. Hopefully you're having a good one to person. I had a pretty good one with myself, hanging out with Mrs. Hueso. She is asleep because it is kind of late for us. So since I'm doing ribs, I got to do two things. I got to prep the ribs by trimming them up, and I also need to mix up the rub that we're going to use for it. And the rub recipe is actually on the Discord. And seem to have forgotten. Seem to have forgotten to put that link in the thing, so let's take care of that right now. Okay. Good day. Game night was fun. Oh, right on. Yeah, that's right. Game night was going on tonight, and would have liked to have hung out, but hanging out with Mrs. Hueso was a little bit more important, so that's what I did. Anyways, there's the recipe link for the rub that we're going to make, and I've got it all set up for it, and so I figured, you know what, let's go ahead and just mix it up now. So the recipe that I have written down, I wrote it out in parts, so then that way it can be scaled as much or as little as you'd like, depending on your own needs. And in this case, you know, it's like it's calling for 72 parts brown sugar versus like 1 part of like mustard powder and stuff. So because it's in parts, it doesn't matter what size measuring implement you use. It could be anything from, you know, thimble, shot glass, pint glass, whatever, doesn't matter. In this case, I'll go ahead and base everything off of the teaspoon. So we'll start with kind of the smaller stuff, and I got my teaspoons out. Calls for a teaspoon of mustard powder. Do that in the bowl. And then, let's see, teaspoon of chili powder. And this is a totally saltless blend, by the way, like most of my stuff. That way you can adjust the amount of salt that you actually decide to add to whatever it is that you're making. That all the way there. Okay, next up. There. And then 6 parts black pepper. Well, it just so happens that 3 teaspoons is a tablespoon, so 6 parts, if you're doing a teaspoon, means it's 2 tablespoons of black pepper, and I just ground this up, so it is fresh as fresh can be. Okay. And then 8 parts paprika. Which is going to be 2 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons. And 4 parts, sorry, 12 parts of the Creole seasoning, which is going to be 4 tablespoons. Then 4 tablespoons each of onion powder and garlic powder. Go. Hey, Munize, what's going on? We are prepping a rub for ribs that we'll be making tomorrow. And then we're also going to be trimming up the ribs in order to put the rub on. So then it's what, 72 parts of brown sugar, which is actually a cup and a half. If you're doing the teaspoon thing. We got a little bit of space, so I'll just pull that up. Mixed up, sugar broken up, get all the spices mixed in. This is totally saltless, which is fantastic because I've said this previously, that the whole reason why I've shifted to using saltless seasoning blends is that the amount of salt that any given piece of meat or whatever needs varies. So it's not like, you know, if I were to mix salt into this and use it as the primary salting source, that, yeah, Grant hasn't streamed this late in a while. He's decided to kind of switch things up to try to make his streams available for more people that can't come to the afternoon streams that he's been doing. So he's going to try and mix it up a little bit more. But anyways, so if salt were mixed into this and I were to put it on, you know, a piece of pork versus, like, say, a piece of beef or something like that, that the amount of flavoring, you know, would be the same needed for both pieces of meat. The problem is salt tends to be different, especially depending on what cut of meat that you're using. Ribs being a thinner piece, like this is a relatively thin rack of spare ribs. Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. You know, you can catch more depending on time zones. Exactly, because most of the, I mean, being on the west coast of North America, you know, tend to think of North America and such, but you don't, and then you realize, oh yeah, Europe is like a solid, you know, 8-9 hours ahead, and then you get to the other side of the world, and when you tend to have a global audience, you know, it's like, oh, maybe it would be good to switch things up once in a while. So I wholeheartedly support that. Okay, our blend here is looking pretty homogeneous and nicely broken up. Not a whole lot of additional lumps or anything like that. Part of me was thinking, you know what? I think I will do it. I saw someone do this earlier today. Yeah, it's streaming when you're working. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, mid-afternoon can be difficult for a lot of folks. So I completely understand that. So I'm actually going to put this into a sifter. One of these guys that you would normally use for like flour or whatever. And this way I can kind of sift on a nice even layer over the ribs when I'm ready to deal with them. In the meantime, let me get this stuff. That is ready to go. Sifter ready to go. Now we have our ribs. Okay. So earlier today, never seen that. Yeah, exactly. Like I had not seen it before too, but it makes total sense. As opposed to using a shaker or something like that, then that way you can just kind of sift it on. So earlier today, I went and bought some ribs. And this is a set of spare ribs that we're going to use, but I'm going to trim them up to a St. Louis style cut. And when I went to buy them, they had St. Louis style ones cut and ready to go, as well as the spare ribs. But what was interesting is when you looked at the per pound price, this was $2.22 a pound. The St. Louis ribs were $4.44 a pound. And there's actually less going on, which once we get this rack cracked open, I'll kind of talk about it a little bit. But it, like, why you would pay that much extra when you could so easily just trim it up yourself, I don't understand, because it's honestly super easy. Flour sifter, ply dryer, green lace grater. Yeah, exactly. Trimming up a set of spare ribs to a St. Louis style is so easy that, I mean, I really don't understand why anybody wouldn't do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glove up, and then I'm going to crack open the bag because there's some like juices and stuff in there, and drain it, and then I'll come back over here and we'll get it all prepped and ready to go. So I'm going to take this over to the sink. Okay. Let's give these a little bit of a wipe down. Chunks of surface fat that you don't want to need. Fireworks go up. So the spare rib is, anatomically speaking, when you're looking at a pig, the spare rib is the section just below where the baby backs are. So the baby backs are run right next to the spine, kind of up at the top, okay? And then the spare ribs come down the sides, and the whole section leads right into kind of the top of the beginning of the belly, going into, you know, the underside, and it contains what would be considered sort of like the brisket, kind of down in that area. But so when you look at the spare rib, you have this section right here. This bit would have connected right to the breastbone on the pig itself, right? And then you have this flap here, which would have been part of the diaphragm. And then down here is more of the connective stuff. This section right here is the part that would have been just on the other side of this, is the where the baby backs are. I'm not personally a big fan of the baby backs. This side would have been towards the head, so if we're looking at a pig head on, they would have sat like this. Yeah. No. They would have sat like that. There you go. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of baby backs personally. The shape of the rib tends to be a little funky. Spare ribs are my go-to. It's just what I personally prefer. So the St. Louis cut immunized, what we're going to get to, it is a subsection of the spare rib, okay? And what it involves is trimming off a few things in order to get to the St. Louis. And actually what it ends up doing is it squares it off and makes it more of a consistent rack of ribs all the way through, as opposed to, because this little bit down here usually just ends up drying out because it's so thin, but it's good meat. It's not meat that I would recommend getting rid of. You can cook it up separately, but we're gonna trim off the end bit here, and then we're going to also trim off this bit of flap meat here, which again is still good, you know, good meat that we're gonna want to hang on to. But for the purposes of making the ribs, it's not necessarily desirable. And then I want to kind of take off a lot of this surface kind of fat here. Intramuscular fat is good. Surface fat, not necessarily. So, okay. I got a bone fragment right here, and this last bone usually ends up being kind of a little bit wonky. So, I'm just gonna take it off. I'm still gonna hang on to it though. So I'll put that there. So that is taking care of that a little bit. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, usually right about there is where we'll end up taking the flap off. But before I do that, let's take off this bit. And the only reason why I'm pulling this off is because, I mean, it's just this little, you know, bit of, you know, little flap of meat that will just end up drying out if you make ribs normally. And it just kind of cleans it up a little bit, and then we can come through and pull off more of that. So now, got these little end bits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So right in there is where I'm going to want to cut. Again, just thin meat that will end up, you know, cooking up, doing something else with it. Now the last bit. So the last little bit, what we're going to do is we want to move it along here, kind of where the tallest rib is, which is about this one. And then right above it, there is a line of cartilage. So I've just lined up this bottom edge with the edge of the cutting board, because knowing that there's cartilage right there, I should be able to just do a straight cut right across, and this will square up. Now this top part will take off, and this is what would be known as like rib tips. If you ever see them on a menu somewhere, that's that bit. I mean, there's a lot of cartilage and some other stuff in there, bit of the breastbone, but we are trimming that off specifically to square it up. And yeah, I mean, that's not an insignificant piece right there, but this stuff is fantastic. I will probably end up roasting this off maybe tomorrow. Cut it in half just for ease sake. So I mean, it is, you know, over what the spare rib rack was. This is definitely smaller. but as you saw, it was super easy to just do a little bit of trimming on it, and we got a nicely squared up rack of ribs ready to be seasoned and wrapped up for the night. Then this we're gonna make this in the Instant Pot tomorrow, so that'll be fun because I've not done it before. People have said that it comes out amazing. I'm excited to give it a shot. I'm really interested to see how it turns out. And after I get it seasoned up and wrapped up, I want to give it a weigh because I am kind of curious how much it is. Ribs in an Instant Pot. Yeah, exactly. When I heard that, I was just like, really? That's interesting. I never would have thought to have done that, but apparently people do it to great success. So I figured, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Because if it makes my Instant Pot that much more useful, then there's no reason why I shouldn't give it a try. Oh, one other thing I forgot to do. Right along here, there's a membrane, which a lot of time, I mean, you can leave it on if you want, but since I'm only doing the one rack, there's no reason not to take it off. Mostly because it's inedible, and it's kind of chewy, but I mean, they remove it in competition type stuff. It's easy enough to do, so we might as well do it. I'm going to got basically kind of a butter knife, and all I'm trying to do is get underneath the membrane and give it a tear. A lot of times, do it right, then it'll come off in one piece, but I just poked a hole in it, so I'm probably going to have to struggle. That's okay. Because it is kind of a pain to get started. There you go. That came off pretty good. Couple of minor bits up here. Nice. And that just exposes the underside. So, all right. So I kind of want to leave one glove on and take one glove off. Hey, Lumpy, what's going on? Yes, ribs. We're making ribs tomorrow, buddy. But I just trimmed up a rack of spare ribs into St. Louis style rack, and so now we're getting ready to season them up. I'm gonna go wash my hands, so then that way I can continue to work with these. Yeah, so that's the plan. Alright, I just got my magic seasoning salt that I'm going to use to salt it up, and then we'll use the flour sifter to apply the rub, and we're just going to do it right here on the cutting board. I got my dry hand and my wet hand, so the wet hand I can handle the ribs, whereas with this hand I can handle everything else. Just think it'd be a lot better to scoop the rub out into there with a big spoon. So, alright. So this particular set of ribs was a Smithfield extra tender, which actually ends up going through a process. What they do is hey, what's going on? See, Zodic is here. Cooking after midnight. Yeah, exactly. I just showed up, and if I stay here for any longer, I'm going... Yeah, funny how that happens. So, the Smithfield extra tender ribs are actually a favorite of competition barbecue teams that do ribs. So what happens is in the processing, they actually put it through a kind of a vacuum tumbler, and there's a seasoning injection that gets kind of put in. Instead of like being needle injected, being in a vacuum environment kind of like helps it, sucks it in. And so they tend to be somewhat seasoned. And have a good night, Zodic, man. Take care, buddy. So you don't necessarily need to add a ton of salt. However, we are going to add a fair amount of rub, because they're more better that way. Alright. That worked very efficiently. On the back side, you don't necessarily need quite as much, just because there isn't as much meat exposed on the back side. And so you want to get a little bit on there, but you don't necessarily need to get a ton, just because it doesn't do any good. The seasoning doesn't go anywhere. And you can see how it's already like starting to get sucked up in there, and brown sugar and everything is doing its job. So now, get out my giant plastic wrap. Alright. That is super awkward and not very clean, but that's okay for right now, because all I was trying to do was get a little bit of plastic on it so I can get it off of the cutting board. Get this out of here. Now we can really wrap. I'm just wrapping this up so it can chill overnight. That's a wrapped up rack of ribs. Sorry if this has been answered, but how are these ribs being cooked? In the Instant Pot. Want to be pickled? They're going to go into the Instant Pot tomorrow. So it should be interesting. Oh. Wanted to weigh these. Because I was curious. Okay, yeah, about 2 1/4. Okay, well, I guess the math holds. When I was reading, doing a whole bunch of reading on the interwebs about doing them in the Instant Pot, into the Instant Pot. Yes, exactly. When I was doing reading on it, they're like, oh yeah, you know, do like a 1.5 2 pound rack of ribs. I'm like, 2 pounds? Like, that is a small rack of ribs. I'm like, well, this is about 2 pounds. This will be enough for Mrs. Weiss and myself, although I would imagine that she will admonish me for not having done a second rack after the fact. I did purchase 2 racks today, so I could very easily make that happen if they turn out as good as I hope they do. The rub recipe, if anybody's interested, is right there. Yeah, so that's up on the Discord. So more or less, this is pressure braising. Basically that's what's going on. We're gonna make a fresh batch of Walesboro barbecue sauce to lather on them to finish them up at the very end. Not 100% on the sides as of yet, because most of the time, you know, your barbecue sides are things like potato salad or macaroni salad, both of which I've made relatively recently. Coleslaw, again, made it recently. So I got to kind of figure out some other sides to go with it. Part of me is thinking doing a liquid sex mac and cheese. That I think would be a really good side to go with it. Not sure what else though, because having some kind of vegetation, I feel is kind of important, even though it's not necessarily the most traditional thing to do. Most barbecue places, vegetation is a total afterthought. You go there for the meat. So, smoked oysters. That would be interesting. Not sure I would trust buying oysters on a Saturday. Well, maybe. Maybe. But you never want to buy like seafood on a Monday, because they don't usually fish on Sundays, and so it's clearly been sitting around for a few days, and so sometimes it can be a little squiffy, depending on whether or not you trust your fishmonger. So, but that's what we got going on tonight. The rub is, you know, rub's been made. We trimmed up the spare ribs into St. Louis ribs. That's seasoned and wrapped. Corn on the cob and ribs is a classic as far as you're concerned. Yeah, corn's in season right now. I'm down to clown with corn on the cob. I love corn on the cob. Most of the time when I make it, I usually roast it, but there's no reason why we couldn't throw it on the grill. Steaming, boiling, you know, those are super common methods of making them. I'll eat it anyway. I love corn on the cob. It's one of my favorite things. Mrs. Wayso, bless her. She has a thing about stuff getting stuck in her teeth. Okay. So that's one of the big reasons why she's not a big fan of things like sesame seeds or raspberries. Because she doesn't, and like corn on the cob, it's like she'll eat it, but she hates getting stuff stuck in her teeth. It's a big pet peeve of hers. And so that's why, like, if I'm feeling like corn on the cob, she's not necessarily the biggest fan on it. On the grill is usually our go-to. Yeah, no, on the grill is really good too, because you get a little bit of smokiness, which is also really good. Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason why we have multiple things of floss around the house, for just that kind of thing. So, but I will consult with Mrs. Waysom in the morning. She's actually got to do some work tomorrow, because thankfully the audit that they've been going through is it in theory will be over on, I think, Monday or something like that. And she has to get month end done because they've had this new person kind of assisting her. She's had to train her, so she hasn't necessarily been able to take care of all the work that she needs to in as timely a fashion as she normally would, because she's having to babysit slash train. So she's going to be doing some work tomorrow, so I got to try to stay out of her hair as much as possible. But corn on the cob and lots of butter, yeah, that is my preferred method. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love me a good elote. The grilled corn with, crema or mayonesa, cotija, usually like a sprinkling of cayenne, maybe some cilantro, chili powder on there. Yeah, totally. I'm a big fan of also putting like my saltless Creole seasoning on there. I just like corn on the cob, period. So yeah, we shall see. It'll be a good time. I'll have plenty of time in order to shop and kind of figure things out before tomorrow afternoon stream. What is kind of interesting is the time on these ribs looks like it'll be about 20 minutes under high pressure, and then letting it naturally coast down. And then when it's done, it's done. And then we'll pop it under the broiler to put some color on it, and we'll do that final glaze with that new batch of Walesboro barbecue sauce. I have a couple of beers that I'm thinking about for it. Possibly this guy. Bottle of Founders Kentucky Breakfast Stout. This one is the 2017 vintage, so this is slightly cellared bottle. Although I could do Brasserie du Sel Aphrodite. This is one that I've had in my cellar for a bit, and this I think could also make for a pretty excellent. It's a stout with cocoa and vanilla beans. That could also make for a really good barbecue sauce. But Lumpy Joe lives in El Barrio, and there are elote vendors that walk the streets. Oh, see, that would be awesome. Like, I will say that that's one of the things that I kind of miss about living in Southern California, is having ready access to that kind of thing. The house that we lived at in Anaheim, there was a large Mexican supermarket not 2 minutes from me, and I was in there all the time. And then just a little bit further up was a section of it's Anaheim. It's actually where it would have been. It's known as Little Gaza. A lot of Middle Eastern places kind of up and down this one section, and a couple of really cool markets, some amazing restaurants, but it was a very large Middle Eastern population kind of in this area, and it was great because there was this one market there that's where I would get all my lamb. It was from them, and their produce was awesome. I was able to get this one time, like, beautiful artichokes that were like softball sized, 5 for $1. Amazing. Yeah. Yeah, the variety of food, and now I want a stout, yeah. And those are only a couple. Like, I've got a whole bunch more. Those are just a couple that I'd pulled out. Yeah, LA and San Francisco, New York, the bigger places tend to have a much larger ethnic clusterings. Immigrants that have come in, and the first thing that they do whenever you get a population of any size is they want their food, and so they start importing. You have markets and you have restaurants and things like that. Especially, oh my gosh, LA has an insane number of very specific, like, ethnic neighborhoods and things like that, and it's awesome. It's awesome. Eating your way through LA can be a daunting task, but it's one that I'm up to. So how does beer age? Is it similar to wine? Some beers are better fresh. You're very correct, Lumpy Pickle. That is a very, very excellent question. So there are a lot of beers that are much better fresh. IPAs, basically the moment it comes out of the fermenter is kind of like considered the best time for it, because that's when it's considered the freshest and you get the full effect of all the hops and everything like that. Same with, most lagers and lighter beers, generally speaking. The ones that tend to age well are things that are usually higher alcohol, and so you get some like barley wines, stouts, some porters, at least the high ABV ones. Scotch ales are another one that tend to do pretty well. But a lot of times it's more of the higher ABV ones that tend to take to aging pretty decently. The exception to that are things like sours. Sours, and especially ones that are made with wild or spontaneous fermentation, they tend to like to be aged for a much longer period of time in order to kind of mellow out a little bit. And so I have a number of sours that are actually, now that I think about it, I have a couple that are almost 15 years old, I think. Yeah, you have a couple of old sours, and they tend to mellow out. I mean, but they do tend to be like wine sometimes, in that there will be times when they peak. But it's not something that is as studied as wine, where they have a pretty good idea of how things age and how long they can let things go. But things, like I said, high ABV stouts especially really take to it really well. The beer that I used for... I didn't really post about this. I think I mentioned it. I made a batch of chocolate stout cupcakes, and the stout that I used was a can of 1050 by Oscar Blues that was canned in 2012. Almost a 10-year-old can. Interesting story about that. A friend of mine, his family owns a liquor store, and he's very big into craft beer. Has an amazing selection. One of the best selections in Orange County, to be honest. One day he's in the cooler stocking, and he was cleaning off a shelf or something like that, and he found a 4-pack of... No, it wasn't a single 4-pack. I think he found... I think it might have been multiple 4-packs of this Oscar Blues 1050 that had somehow made its way underneath the bottom rack and pushed up towards the front. Hadn't realized that they were there. Checked the date on them, and at the time I think they were like 5 or 6 years old or something like that. And at the time, nobody had really thought about and tried out aging beers in can, because the conventional wisdom being glass bottles being the best medium for aging beers. Anyways, he cracked it open and said it was amazing. That it had mellowed out and was really enjoyable. I had been in contact with him and made friends with him, even though at the time I was a beer buyer for Whole Foods, but we weren't in direct competition because his shop was super far away from where I was working, so there was no overlap or anything like that. But I had him hold on to a 4-pack for me, and I came and bought it. Please, not too much fried olive oil on mine. No? Well, I hadn't planned on frying any olive oil, but, you know, welcome, Sodos. Yeah. So, yeah. That's how we figured out that you could actually age canned beers. And so, I had, whenever Oscar Blues was annually releasing their 1050, because it was like a once-a-year release sort of thing that they would do. But, I mean, it was widely available, but it was only released during this one point of the year. I tried to make a point of buying a 4-pack, you know, for a couple of years, so then that way I had multiple cannings of it. So, yeah, there we go. I should duck out, getting light here, having a lovely rest of the stream. Good seeing you all as always. Yeah, take care, Immunize. To be honest, like, I'm just chewing the fat right now, really, and it's after midnight, and I should really get to bed. So, I will probably duck out myself. So, thanks, folks, for sticking around. Love you guys. Take care. Have a good night. And I will see you all at 4 p.m. PST tomorrow. We will make some ribs. Have a good night.
Hello, boys and ghouls. DK's making a snack today. What's it gonna be? What's it gonna be?